grocery retailers have to automate because everyone who is really large is moving towards doing that. The Walmarts and the Amazons, the H-E-Bs, certainly Kroger and Albertson. So I think you're going to look in the future and say, yeah, more and more retailers will have to automate because if they can't do that, they won't be able to compete.
Welcome to Beyond the Pick, where we explore the latest innovations in robotics and AI for supply chains. We have two great guests today to talk about the opportunities and challenges in the online grocery market. Our first guest, Brittain Ladd, is a prolific writer and commentator on the U.S. grocery and retail market. He's advised companies such as Amazon, Kroger, and Instacart on their e-grocery strategy and has extensive experience in automation and logistics. Our second guest is Dr. Matthias Schu, professor of e-commerce and retail at the HSLU University in Switzerland. Dr. Schu also acts as a consultant to various grocers throughout Europe about their online strategy. Let's dive right in. When I look at the grocery market in the US, the sense that I have is that Walmart is leading the pack. You have Kroger that is kind of competitive but hampered by, poor strategic decisions in the past. And everyone else is kind of struggling to compete or falling by the wayside. Why is that, Brittain?
Well, the primary reason is that Walmart, years ago, right around 1986, they understood how strategic groceries truly were to their future. So they've steadily invested in making their grocery market, their grocery capability, really best in class over the years. The other thing is that many companies today, many grocery retailers today, still don't honestly understand how things have changed. They're not investing enough in the digital aspect of their business. They've made false assumptions of how much the online business was going to grow. And one of the things that still amazes me the most is that they really haven't embraced automation. So there are companies that are leveraging third parties to do fulfillment of their online grocery, and they rely on these third parties, but they are not really leading. I think Walmart truly is leading the grocery industry. And I think the majority of the grocery retailers out there are simply following. Now, there are exceptions, of course, but at a high level, I'd say the reason why Walmart's doing so well is they simply understand how strategic groceries truly are.
Yeah, and I think it's great you mentioned that because my sense is Instacart in particular gave a lot of grocers like a false sense of security during COVID because suddenly, obviously everyone moved online, everyone wants to buy groceries online, and here's someone who can help them sell to consumers online, but obviously it's not sustainable in the long term because what it's actually doing is it's killing their profitability and commoditizing all of the grocers as suppliers with the consumers, right? Do you think that, long-term in-store picking outside of, specific MFC type strategies where you have integrated automation with in-store picking, but pure in-store picking as a strategy is even sustainable for anyone?
No, and I really have never believed it was. I think that the retailers who are leveraging in-store picking, especially from a third party, really don't understand that 100% of that cost of that in-store picking really has to be paid for by the retailer itself at the store level. That cost really is not scaled, it's not transferable. It is 100% the responsibility of that retailer. If you think about it, when consumers come in the shop, they do 100% of the work. They pull everything off the shelf, they put it in their basket, they're doing the work. But when you have to rely on a third party to do in-store picking, they do all of the work, and there's a cost for that. So that's why I think so many grocery retailers struggle to even come close to breaking even because of all of the costs that they're incurring and having to pay a third party to pick from the store. I know why they pick from the store, but it really doesn't make much sense long term at all.
Yeah, for sure. The way I like to think about groceries, you obviously have the gross margin, which is pretty much the same. But then in online grocery, you're laying on top all the picking and the last mile costs. And sure, you don't have the real estate footprint, so your picking costs kind of get compensated by that. But then you have last mile as well, which customers aren't willing to pay for. And that gets you to, negative margins. So that's why companies like Walmart, they're investing so heavily in automation to try to compensate for all of those extra costs that are layered on top with other, parts of their supply chain, which, traditionally haven't been, let's say, the most important focus area for grocers. And so if you think about, the US market as a whole, do you actually see anyone catching up to Walmart and or Kroger? I know, for example, Amazon is trying to grow online, but they're clearly struggling. So if not them, then who else?
Well, so when we really think about this, we have to say, so who is honestly making an effort to grow their grocery business and do it nationwide? Certainly, Amazon is doing that. We know for a fact that Amazon is piloting some MFC solutions from other companies. They're only doing a few, they're still learning about this. We know that HEB in Texas, they've installed 8 micro fulfillment systems, and but they've paused doing any more for the moment. And then we really look at and say, well, what about Kroger? So Kroger's doing a great job. They're using Ocado. I honestly think the Ocado model is ideal for most grocery retailers, but supplemented with MFC. I think the big challenge that someone has, like a Kroger, is they embrace the Ocado model too soon. And I think they really should have gone with more of an MFC solution first, and then introduce the Okada model a little more slowly. But when I think of, so who really is going to catch Walmart? It's not going to be Kroger. It's not going to be Albertsons, even if they merge. They're still going to be, 10 points below Walmart. I think I wrote about this actually in 2013. And my argument was, if Amazon acquires Whole Foods and if Amazon leverages micro fulfillment, I said by 2030, between 2030 and 2035, Amazon has the potential to become the largest grocery retailer in the US. I still believe that's possible. I think Amazon has been a little slow, but I still look out there and say if anyone is going to catch up to Walmart, more than likely it's going to be Amazon to do that.
Got it. And you mentioned a word there, nationwide. Does it have to be nationwide, or do you foresee regional players who are able to compete in their
No, see,
state?
that's a great point. So when I was doing my research, what I was looking at, so who would honestly win the grocery war? Who would be the largest? And I certainly think, like I said, Amazon can do that. However, on a regional basis, the retailers who say we need to have an MFC strategy, we need to have an automation strategy, a better digital strategy. You would certainly see HEB in Texas is absolutely going to win. I think they'll beat everybody. Then you look at Kroger and Albertsons and you say, well, if they merge, there's some potential there for them on a regional basis. Certain regions of the US, they ought to be able to make the investment in the technology and so forth and win. In Florida, you have Publix. Publix absolutely is winning on that on a regional basis there, but Publix is being smart. Publix is actually expanding to different states. They're opening up new stores in Kentucky, for example. So I think Publix has a lot of growth ahead of that. And you look at Aldi. Aldi's going to have 3,200 stores by 2028. So there's going to be these companies that have maybe a nationwide capability, but they're better in specific regions. Then you have retailers who are truly nationwide, but they may not necessarily own a specific region, but overall they're maybe number one or number two. The challenge that they are going to encounter again is the Walmart effect, that there is a Walmart within 10 miles of 90% of the US population. And so they're doing some interesting things at the store level. They certainly have a lot of desire for automation. And so that's going to give them strategic edge. And that's really what the thing is that I've always argued the most. Grocery retailers have to automate because everyone who is really large is moving towards doing that, the Walmarts and the Amazons, the HEBs, certainly Kroger and Albertson. So I think you're going to look in the future and say, yeah, more and more retailers will have to automate because if they can't do that, they won't be able to compete.
I view the grocery market as a winner takes most regional market because when it comes to, specific regions, obviously, so the scale advantages that come with online grocery are even bigger than with traditional physical, because you have, fulfillment centers that can be located closer to customers, which reduces last mile costs. You can have a higher density of delivery vans out at any one point in time, which means that you can offer customers more convenient delivery options and so forth. Obviously, bigger players can invest more in automation and so forth. And that's, on top of all the usual scale effects that you have in groceries, like, purchasing power and overheads and so forth. So, in my opinion, in the long term, you're going to go towards two, maybe three regional leaders, and then everyone else is really going to struggle to justify the economics of online groceries. And we already see that to some extent happening in Europe. So, for example, in the UK, you have Tesco's and Sainsbury's. In the Netherlands, you have Picnic, Albert Heijn. In Central Europe, you have Rohlik Group and so forth. A question for you, Matthias. If you're not one of the leaders, if you're, let's say, one of the followers, what do you do nowadays when it comes to
What I would
online?
say in case of Europe, as you already pointed out a little bit, yeah, the winner takes it most attempts have been, I think, then also widely observed, mainly then with the phenomenon of the quick commerce sector there in the 3 last years. And the expansion attempts there. And as we've seen, that was not the biggest success story then in e-grocery in this sector than in Europe. And I think if we separate this a little bit and focus more on the larger shopping baskets and the supermarket range there, I think the world, as you also pointed out a little bit, the world looks a little different. And I think, as you also have shown with your examples, well, interestingly, there is not a single market per country, but you have very small and many monopolies there and a division into regions or even into individual metropolitan areas there. And I think this also takes then a little bit off the pressure to drive then a rapid mega expansion. As we saw it then in the quick commerce sector some years ago, and also a few years ago with the restaurant delivery services here in Central Europe. But I think as a retailer, yeah, I will not be able to avoid e-grocery and stationary food retail in the medium term. And yeah, at the latest, I think once the e-grocery has reached a market share of, let's say, around about 10% in a country, I think the resulting slump in sales in brick and mortar stores in favor of the online retail will be painfully felt then in Europe. And I think also as a follower, you have to invest in e-grocery, either on your own or with the help of partners and platforms, for example.
And speaking of followers, which when it comes to online grocery, in many cases is actually the incumbents in the, physical space, it feels like many of them are kind of falling behind, and they don't have a very clear strategic direction when it comes to investing in online. Because on the one hand, they're still not profitable online, partially because, for a lack of automation, as you said. On the other hand, to compensate for that, they're trying to, let's say, limit the consumer choice, either restrict the number of SKUs they offer, or, very weak delivery propositions, let's say only next day and so forth. So they're kind of in this catch-22 where they neither have the profitability nor they have the, value proposition for customers to actually, win market share, or even maintain their market share online, right? Why do you think that's so hard for these, let's say, traditional retailers to do?
Well, focusing on these traditional retailers, I think, in addition to the points you've mentioned, we see a phenomenon which can be called the so-called innovator's dilemma, which was then also formulated in the US by the Harvard professor Clayton Christensen. And that comes here into play as well. So large companies fail at least also when you're looking to Europe or the DACH area. And I think not because they have failed to recognize the market developments and the shifts in the market, but because they are, yeah, let's say a little bit afraid to fall short of their shareholders' expectations for a while, and by disrupting then their existing profitable business model. Or to put it bluntly, you try to milk the cow, yeah, until it no longer produces milk instead of tapping into new, let's say, potential revenue streams then, and this at an early stage. And I think the main issue here is something like a kind of risk avoidance, but also then a lack of willingness to invest then in new business models and new techniques, new distribution channels, and so on. And think in the long term, of course, you leave the market or yeah, more innovative players are there and they reach then your customer base. And you as a retailer, if you're not leveling up and follow them, yeah, you will lose relevance then over time.
Yeah, and I guess this is where the advantage of being, let's say, an online-only player like Rohlik or Picnic, where you don't have the legacy store footprint, that's really an advantage, right? Because you don't have to carry that weight and those shareholder expectations. That's actually something that I found very interesting, where in Europe we have quite a lot of those purely online players who are, pretty big and successful already. But there's none actually in the US. I know there's been a few smaller companies who have tried, but no one's really scaled to a nationwide level. Brittain, do you have any idea as to why it's so different in the US versus Europe?
Well, I really think the primary difference in the United States is that customers really do prefer to go shop in a store. Survey after survey shows, that 65% of the people in the US prefer to shop in a store. And so for the pure play online retailers, and when we look at Amazon, we could make the argument that they are really the only pure play online retailer for groceries, because the other retailers out there all are part of Instacart, or they have physical stores and they're basically advertising that you can order groceries online from us and we'll pick it in the store and then we'll deliver it. But there are companies that I know that will want it to want online stores in the US, and they simply chose not to. And I think COVID really disrupted a lot of things. A lot of people thought, oh my God, online is going to be where everyone's going to want to shop. And I had made the argument that no, that once COVID ended, people were going to go right back into the store. And that's really what happened. And that's why in the US, online is only about 10% of the grocery market today. So I think what we're going to see is what we've been seeing. You're going to see Amazon continue to invest in online. You're going to see companies continue to use Instacart. It'll be interesting to see what Allison's and Folders do if they see another and see what they're going to do online. But it's just a business model of a pure play online just hasn't really taken off. And I never really expected that it would, because there are so many grocery stores and convenience stores of people can shop that there's a large segment of the population that says I don't really need to shop online because I can just drive 3 miles and pick up my grocery. And that's why more people order online, buy online and pick up at the store than buy online and have it delivered. Only about 2% of groceries in the US are delivered to a customer. The rest are either picked up at the store or the customer goes and shops and buys their own grocery. So it's a very low number when you look at the full bulk.
Yeah. But I guess even the buy online, pick up in store still faces many of the same challenges because someone has to
See, that's
pick those
just it.
orders, which
That's
costs
just
money.
it. And it goes back to what I write about a lot on LinkedIn and my articles. And when I speak about this topic, the thing is that again, when we look long term, what has to change? And I still believe that companies should be looking at saying, well, this is how we're going to leverage automation so that we're automating the buy online pickup at store process. We're automating how we fulfill orders online so that you're leveraging the automation, you're reducing your total labor headcount that you need, and you're adding really more science to this. Right now, again, I think a lot of retailers, because it's so low, it's only about 10% of the overall business. They still are treating this as, well, I don't need to make a lot of investment because it's only 10%. And I think that's a dangerous way to think. Like, there are a few retailers out there who are investing in automation, HEB and Amazon and so forth, certainly Walmart, but they have a long way to go. Even Walmart. Walmart, I'm amazed at how few automated systems they've actually installed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the reasons why they haven't installed many, at least from what we hear from customers as well in the market, is that online grocery fulfillment is so complex. It's not like your e-commerce fulfillment, right? You're picking very large order sizes. You have multiple different picking zones. You have multiple different temperature zones. You have to consolidate the orders, post pick. When it comes to MFCs, you have, part of it in store, part of it in the automation and so forth. And it's just such a complicated topic that it feels like many automation vendors aren't able to address that appropriately enough. And yet at the same time, the operators, the retailers themselves, they don't have the technical know-how to solve this challenge themselves either, right? And I think even, companies like, for example, Takeoff, which obviously went bankrupt a couple weeks ago, even they've been struggling to do that. So, and I feel like that's more of a problem in the US than in Europe. I don't know if Matthias disagrees or not, but it feels like in the US, in general, grocers are somehow less comfortable with all of this complexity that goes on with online grocery.
At least I would say for Europe, yes. And I think in Europe, the retailers also try to avoid to mix up the channels more than in the US. So especially when you're looking to the DACH area, yeah, of course, there are players who are doing store picking. For example, in Germany, also Rewe is using store picking, or started at least with store picking some years ago, the online operations. But you really try to avoid to mix up these channels, because store picking and then all the other store processes are so complex that you really try to separate then the channels. So you cannot say in e-grocery, for example, that you really have a multi-channel or omni-channel approach than in Europe. So really try to say, hey, when I'm doing the online channel, I have hopefully an automated separate warehouse there, just using that. And then for the store, I also have then a separated independent logistics for then also bringing goods to the store and so on.
Yeah, exactly. And that's my impression as well. And I think that relates to one of the topics you mentioned, Brittain, which is ideally, let's say how you called it, the Ocado model, which is, let's say, centralized fulfillment from a single automated warehouse. That's, let's say, the most efficient when it comes to online. But obviously that requires a certain level of scale and online penetration in the market, which the US probably doesn't have yet. And then on top of that, you also have the curbside pickup and the, buy online, pickup in store that customers love, which obviously becomes much harder if you're fulfilling from a centralized warehouse
Oh, it is.
location.
It is. And I've had discussions with Ocado about that because of their model, they've really limited, frankly, being able to meet the needs of the consumer in the US. The consumer in the US really wants things fast. Same day, be able to order online, go pick it up in an hour, be able to order online, have it delivered, in 2 hours or whatever. So it's really hard for Ocado to be able to do that. And so one of the reasons why I'm such a big fan of BrightPick is, I've researched all of the leading MFC companies out there. And so my argument has been in my articles and to the companies I've spoken with, I said, look, you need to basically create your own centralized picking model, but you're simply doing it locally. You're basically putting it among a cluster of stores. And you can either build an MFC and have an addition onto a store, and you're picking for multiple stores from that location. You can simply open up a standalone MFC, maybe among 10 or 15 stores or 100 stores or whatever, sort of like what HEB is doing in Texas. But the thing that I really stress to them is that there is a big difference in the quality and the capability of the MFC players out there. And so whenever someone asks me about this, I say, you really want to evaluate, what is BrightPick doing? Pay attention to the software. Pay attention to who's really figured out how do you manage all of the complexity that's involved in online fulfillment, not only to fulfill an order that's going to be delivered, but also how do you fulfill an order, have it ready for buy online, pick up at the store, or buy online and pick up at the micro fulfillment center, which is something that could easily be done. And so there is a lot of complexity here. I understand why the retailers struggle, but I really say to them, start taking advantage of these companies that are out there and have these discussions, because as we look forward, online is going to increase in importance and into the strategic importance. And that's why I say you really have to have an understanding. So what's your option in terms of automation? What's really the best thing you should be doing?
Yeah, for sure. And it feels like a lot of these automation solutions, they were really designed for e-commerce, where in e-commerce, all you're doing is you're storing and picking, right? It's very much almost like a point solution just for that. Whereas in grocery, that's, let's say 1/3 of the value chain. You then need to, consolidate the orders. You have to deliver them to customers same day or, within 2 hours and so forth, which obviously in e-commerce, that doesn't exist, right? If you're shipping out orders in the afternoon and you're getting them in the morning, you're already probably the best in your industry, right? Whereas with online groceries, they have to go out almost within 1 or 2 hours of getting the orders. Is that the reason why you also think that obviously, MFCs, they've been a huge focus area during COVID. It almost feels like everyone was touting them as the solution for all of, online groceries problems. And since then, nothing's really happened on that front. I mean, you've had a few players that have installed MFCs, but really the penetration has been pretty underwhelming compared to the expectations, let's say 3 years ago. Is that because of all of this complexity and how hard it is to get
Well,
right?
I mean, I really was one of the first people globally to start writing about this topic. And I started writing about this topic about 3 years ago, 4 years ago. And the argument that I made was that this was going to be solely dependent upon what was the growth of online. If online would have stayed at 20 and 30% as it was during COVID, many, many grocery retailers would have already been installing MFCs. We know that for a fact. But it happened exactly the way I predicted. COVID shot the numbers way up. When COVID ended, it dropped back down. It's only 10% of a retailer's business. So a lot of retailers look at that, say, well, it's 10% of my business. I can continue to pick from the store. Eventually, if it picks up, I'll add more automation, or I will automate. The other challenge, frankly, is that nobody shares information about what they have achieved using an MFC. HEB has never once said, this is what we achieved by our MFCs. They don't put out that data. Ahold Delhaize, they have not put out anything. So Walmart has never released anything. Amazon is just now getting into the MFC game. And so a lot of retailers, frankly, sat back and said, well, I don't want to invest in something until I know really what's the best thing for me as a retailer, as a grocery retailer. But what are the leaders in this space going to do? And it was really the fact that Walmart made a first mover advantage to an extent. Now you have Amazon. And so I guess, so really when I speak to executives, what they say to me is they're like, we're just kind of waiting to see what really becomes the best model. And when you only have 10% of something be in your business, you have the luxury of being able to wait. I still believe that it's only a matter of time before you see more automation. But yeah, unfortunately, because Walmart and Amazon, and especially Amazon, is just getting into this now, a lot of retailers are sitting back and saying, well, I'm going to wait and see what does Amazon really come up with.
Now you're obviously risking them running away, especially Walmart, just continuing to get
Correct.
market share,
Correct.
right? MFC is an interesting topic in Europe as well because, Matthias, you mentioned centralized fulfillment in Europe. I feel like obviously one of the reasons why MFCs are such a hot topic in the US is because store sizes tend to be larger, so you can fit in automation into existing stores. In Europe, we tend to have slightly smaller formats usually. We have hypermarkets here and there, but they're definitely rarer than in the US. Do you think that MFCs is a viable strategy in Europe at all? We have players, for example, like Tesco, who are actively exploring that, but it's been even more limited than in the US. And the ones that have succeeded, like the pure play online players, they've always relied on sort of centralized fulfillment.
Well, I think especially when you're focusing on retailers in Central Europe, not on the UK, I think for them you have also to define what micro fulfillment means. And for me, these are then the smaller, highly automated warehouses with areas between 1,000 and around about 10,000 square meters. And I really think so far in Central Europe, we hardly see this model now for e-grocery. And the most providers either rely then on the inefficient store picking still, manual picking in a warehouse, or all these few large CFCs with a hub and spoke model there. Uh, but I think I could imagine that larger MSCs could be really an option for today's models and can be used as something like a regional warehouse from which then customers within a radius up to 30 kilometer could be directly then delivered and supplied.
Yeah, I think MFCs itself depends how you define it, right? Because a lot of people, for example, in the US, MFCs is defined as back of store fulfillment or located in the store. But in many cases, other people define it as a simply slightly smaller fulfillment center located closer to the customer, right? Similar to the Rohlik model or something of that sort. So definitely, and I think the big benefit that you have with groceries is that unlike, let's say, traditional retail, apparel, and so forth, you don't need to hold a lot of inventory on hand. Typically grocers, they have maybe 20 days of inventory on hand. You don't need to hold 3 months, so your actual footprint can be much smaller. It's a lot more about the volume and the throughput than it is about storing produce and just having it on hand in case someone buys it, right? um
And
Super
there's
interesting.
another fact which also came up into my mind, especially for Europe or for the DACH area. What you can also play easily with micro fulfillment centers, you can also play it in regional assortments, especially in Europe. That can be a game changer. And when you have just, let's say, 2 or 3 centralized fulfillment centers there with a hub and spoke model, you're never able to do regional assortments.
Yeah, definitely. We've seen that, uh, companies have been leveraging that to, again, establish themselves regionally and have a regional supply chain. Speaking of that, actually, Germany is becoming a hotbed of activity in Europe. You have obviously Knusper and Rohlik there. You have Edeka, which is the legacy, let's say, market leader now. Picnic is actively moving in. Oda, recently left, but they were fairly small as well. What do you think will happen with the German market in the next couple of years?
Well, I think the exciting thing about the German online food market is that on the one hand, it has a really great potential, and on the other, yeah, the market penetration and the market share is extremely low at the moment, with roughly around 3%. And of course, in cities, I think it's much higher. So, for example, when you take Berlin, we're also close by us now. I think we can speak of probably 12 to 15% market share already. But for the whole country, there is still a lot of potential. And I think in the long term, I assume that in Germany, Knusper, Picnic, and probably then the Rewe will divide the market then for large shopping baskets and supermarket deliveries between then in regions, where probably per region you have one leader and 2 followers, for example, or just 2 players. But at the moment, I think we are still so far in the greenfield side there in Germany that this will be possibly for the next 2-3 years that you can grow there together without any displacement struggle, I would say. And I think then also compared to the supermarket assortment, in addition, you will probably have then in the bigger cities or in the major cities then the platform solutions like a Lieferando or like a Volt, which are originally more placed than in the restaurant delivery sector, and I think they will also then take over some of this quick commerce volumes from Gekia, from Gorillas, and from wherever. And I think they will then cover special customer needs as a kind of premium service, and then I think quasi in no time.
Yeah, I think the low market penetration, it's kind of chicken or the egg, right? Because you can't expect consumers to buy online if the customer value proposition isn't there, right? If you have legacy companies still offering, let's say, next day delivery, high delivery fees, a limited product assortment, high minimum order sizes and so forth, then of course you're not going to expect the consumer to, start shopping online. But then if you have some of these new, let's say, disruptive entrants come in like Nusfer or Picnic, who are able to offer, 15, 20,000 SKUs, 3-hour delivery, consistently high quality of service and a pretty low cost, I think that's where it starts being interesting. And I think that's what we've seen as well, for example, in Czech Republic and the Netherlands, with these pure play online companies where obviously they're let's say loss leading because they offer this proposition to customers. But then over time, as they get scale, they get these economies of scale, they invest in automation, and they're able to, achieve profitability while being competitive versus offline, right? And offering customers an equivalent value proposition. There's one last topic I want to touch on, which is actually related to this in the U.S., relating to something we already spoke about, Brittain. But with regards to pure play online players in the U.S. like Amazon, obviously Kroger made a big push into Florida with that, trying to go head to head with Publix. It's pretty ironic now Publix is extending into Kroger's backyard in Kentucky and so forth. What are the learnings from Kroger's sort of experience in Florida? Is it successful, or if not, how
Well,
come?
I think they made a mistake. Kroger did, because they really didn't leverage the Okada model the way it was designed. So I think it's a bad idea for any retailer to enter a new territory without being able to have proven already what they can do, that they have quality and so forth. They don't have stores in Florida. And so they move into Florida and they try and convince consumers there who are grown up with public, and they're trying to say to them, look, leverage us. You can order your groceries online. Deliver. I don't think it came down to a lack of service or anything like that. It really came down to the fact that in Florida, you have an entrenched player like Publix in a mature market. And so I don't think that the model worked very well for them. However, I think under the right circumstances, it could have. And I really think that what Kroger is going to have to do, and I really am hoping this happens, and I've written about this, I really believe that Kroger should acquire Ocado and make Tim Steiner the CEO of Kroger and the combined Kroger Albertsons if they merge. If they don't acquire Ocado, I still think they should have Tim Steiner be the CEO of Kroger and Albertsons, and here's why. I think Tim is someone who's going to say, number one, what we have to do for retailers is elevate our game when it comes to automation, when it comes to looking out there and saying, what is the best service that we could provide for online and in the store? And I'd really like to see what would someone like Tim do in terms of looking at a massive market like the US and having a retailer with over 5,000 stores and say, this is our strategy of where we're going to leverage Ocado, but this is where we really do need to leverage micro-fulfillment. And I think that's what will change the game for Kroger and Albertsons. I think it's going to be the spark that's going to lead to more retailers, more grocery retailers automating. Because if you think about it, another reason why technology hasn't taken off in the US and MFCs is none of the retailers, none of the CEOs have experience with it. Only a few retailers, a few grocery retailers in the US have any experience with MFCs at all. So having someone like Tim Steiner who can say, we're talking about this business completely differently now. We talk about it. How do we become the most profitable grocery retailer? Well, we leverage automation. We leverage centralized fulfillment. We leverage micro fulfillment. And I think that's really what will change the way a lot of grocery is run and managed in the US. It needs to have the right spokesperson. And frankly, I think Tim is ideal to do that. To your earlier point about Tesco, Tesco is still very interested in micro fulfillment. I've spoken with them recently, and what they said to me is they're looking for a much more nimble micro fulfillment system than what they're using. So they have tremendous interest in the topic. What they're looking for is a better system. So I know even in Europe, you should see this still continue to grow. It just simply may be that it's really desperate the ones who are really leading it versus, for the large grocery retailers anyway, I certainly see Rolex is absolutely in a class by themselves, just as Picnic is.
Gentlemen, this was super interesting. Thanks a lot for your time. I look forward to
Thank
talking
you so
to
much. I
next
enjoyed
time.
being here.
Beyond the Pick is brought to you by Brightpick. We care deeply about improving supply chain resilience, and we hope these stories inspire you to view your supply chain as a source of strength, not risk. To learn more about how we improve supply chain resilience, visit brightpick.ai, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed this content. See you next time.